Jeremy, it's great that you could talk to me. Just tell me a little bit about who you are, what you do. So,
thank you. Well, Liz, it's lovely to have the opportunity. So I'm Jeremy Hollow, and I'm the founder and the CEO of Listen and Learn Research. We are an insight agency that works predominantly with social data. We see our sort of purpose in life is to help people become more strategic, more creative, and more innovative. And we do that by transforming social data into insight that fuels brand growth, customer acquisition, and market innovation.
And do you see that as qualitative data?
That's a great question. I see it as both. I've always struggled with the definition between the two. And I think the way that the industry's grown up has sort of created this divide between the two techniques. And I think the interesting thing about social data is you have so much of it, which lends itself to a technical, analytical, quantitative approach. But the nature of the data is all qualitative. So it's really stuck between the two things. And I think that's where, for me, that's where the magic happens. And that's where we've designed our methodology and brought together different elements of traditional research practice to develop a workflow that is really based around quantifying qualitative content, but then keeping the spirit of it all, keeping those stories alive through the process.
And do you use AI to do that? How do you process that information?
So I think AI is really interesting as a disruptive technology that we're coming to grips with at the moment. I think it's still very early days for lots of people, and what we've done is we've started experimenting. And so our workflow a year ago didn't have AI in it. I don't think many people's did in the research world. Now it has AI in it, but the way that we do it, so from our perspective, it can't be black box. So it can't be we've deployed our AI tools and here's your answer. It has to be robust, it has to be understandable, and how we're using it and what we're getting back. So if I think about our workflow, the thing that I thought it would be great at would be coding content. I thought it'd be brilliant at that, and it's rubbish at it. What it is really good at is synthesizing data from the tests that we've done across it. So I think that might be controversial what I said about the coding the data, but from the tests that we do, we code data day in, day out. So we do it, it's a core part of what we do as a business. Where we have seen it being really interesting is, and there's two parts here, one, how it shifts the workflow, but then how the team need to adapt and be open to change as well. So two different things, capability and then readiness to change is interesting. So from the capability point of view, it's subtle, and it's kind of like bit of human, bit of AI, bit of human, bit of AI. It's like a barcode of that kind of approach. So you get a really thin slices of each activity. So a human team would set it up, let it run, test it, let it run, let it run, let it run, test. And from that point of view, it's becoming really interesting for thinking about designing queries for data collection. So thinking about different ways that people use language, that's really helpful. Thinking about ways of structuring some of that content. And then when it gets into the coding practice, I said that we haven't found a good tool that's really does as well as my team can do in the same time. But then we'll get at the end of that process, then synthesis. It's helpful, but at this moment, it feels like a dumb friend. So it's telling you some stuff, but it's not making huge leaps of cognition. It's not bringing in context. It's not working the data as in a way that a qualitative researcher would be able to. But it is doing a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of drawing out some of the things. So I wouldn't let it run amok on a project on its own, but it's definitely welcome at certain stages in the process.
So it's making you more productive, but not replacing you.
No,
at the moment.
Yeah, at the moment. And I don't see it being that, because I think there's in any part of it, I think within a project, we kind of think of projects as discovery, which is that what's the opportunity? What's the context? What are the challenges you as a client have got? And no AI is going to solve that straight away, because the challenge of business is the challenge of people. So we have to understand people and how businesses run, and all of that's complex. So we have that discovery phase. Then we have like the insight generation phase. And I think for that process, human and AI work really nicely together at certain and with strengths and weaknesses from both sides. But then when you get into the activation stage, you need that team that can tell the right narrative that's going to work towards one of those outcomes like I mentioned. So if you're thinking about market innovation, it's like you're not going to get an answer from an AI tool that's going to enable you to just go, oh, it's just B, just do B. It doesn't work that way. It's around how do you communicate insight to an audience? How do you activate insight to an audience and understand their context, understand what's going on, understand that process of selling in is not the right word, but it is selling in. So you can have the best insight in the world, but if you package it really poorly or don't communicate it in the right way, it won't reach its potential. So you've got to activate that insight within that audience that you're working with. And that's complex, and that's about personality, and that's about kudos, and about your ability to help shape a discussion in the room and bring the best out of the people that are receiving what you're trying to tell them. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of that is a more deliberative process that I think is just a really core skill. So I just think AI will just shift. It will make people more productive. I think it will shift the thinking towards higher end, more consultative elements to the project that you're working on, more thinking outside of, more bringing in different component parts to make it more solution focused. So I understand like selling you some IT equipment. Do you know what I mean? It's less about here's the deck of the results and much more about here's the activation piece.
And that makes me slightly concerned in that those are skills that somebody acquires over time.
Yeah.
So how does somebody get into the industry? How do they suddenly go from being a trainee to this person that is able to add those insights, influence? Do you think it's going to make it harder for people to get into the profession?
Not necessarily. I just think the tool set will change, because we all started here, didn't we? We all started writing surveys and doing focus groups and doing transcripts and doing all the entry part work. And then over time, as you grow into the career, the commercial implications, how to run a room, how to deliver these findings, how to set that, how to have a proper insight impact, that develops through that career. We had certain tools as we went through our part of our career. People coming into the industry now will have a different set of tools, but the challenge will still be the same and the outcome will still be the same. So I said at the top that our job is to help people be more creative, more innovative, and more strategic. That's always going to be the mission. That's always going to be the mission. That's why it's our mission statement. It's like, it's always going to be the purpose. That's the job, right? And my job is to make your eyes light up with new ideas. If I can't do that, then we shouldn't be in the room. How I get to that is going to change over time. We're not using punch cards anymore, right? So, but it's that, for me, it's the core skill of communication, strategic communication, strategic insight creation, enabling to really get to those endpoints. We're just going to have different tools.
And does that mean that you think that the skills that we're going to be looking for, or you're looking for even moving forward, are going to be very similar to the ones that you were looking for 10 years ago?
I think yes and no. I think it's very rare that you see like fully fledged consultative thinking at the younger, at the sort of the graduate level thinking, because they just haven't had the experience. They just don't know. Some people you find, and they're just like brilliant, born strategic, and they're off. But it's something that grows over time as they become. You tend to start your career going, right, I'm technically don't know anything. I technically know stuff. I'm technically expert. I then start managing. It tends to be that kind of route, doesn't it? And I think what they're learning will be different. So I think there will be how you integrate different tech. So there will be a marketing research tech stack. There'll be, we're doing this. It's not just we outsource it to there or we do this. There will be, right, how do we use these tools to get to the endpoint faster? And that's definitely going to be a big part of it. And you'll have people coming into it which are totally native to it. It's like, why wouldn't you use it? They would have written their thesis, they would have done their revision using OpenAI without doubt. It just would have been born into it. But it's still, again, developing those skills in tandem.
Do you feel positive then about the future of Insight? Do you think?
I'm always positive. I'm positive about anything, and that's because that's the way I am. But I think it's an exciting time. I think you got two mindsets, right? So let's take objective reality out of it. It's just what you can do with life is what you can do with life, and I choose to be positive about what I can do and how you can be creative in the work that you're doing. But it is undoubtedly complex, and it will shift the skill sets of the sector, and it will make people uncomfortable, and we will be fighting for a different kind of business, and the struggle will change. But that's commerce, right? That's the nature of capitalism. That's the nature of how free markets work. It's the nature of how competition drives innovation. we shouldn't be scared of it. We just need to be open and accept the fact that it's new, accept the fact that it feels daunting, accept all the challenges that it's got, but come at it with a yes and kind of approach rather than a no thank you kind of approach.
When you say you're going to be fighting for a new sort of business, more consultative business, I guess, is that what you mean?
If you're being more productive at the process of generating insight, then the application is that either everything suddenly gets cheaper, or you allocate more thinking to actually helping the client activate the insights internally, or do something more robust with it, or look at more things, or broaden the scope, or broaden your horizons about what you can bring into the study.
Which actually makes it more interesting to me.
Absolutely. Yeah, it makes it broader. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You're able to look at more things. We have sample sizes because we can't look at everything. Yeah. Right. So if you, and this has always been the promise of, or the interest about social, is it gives you, from a qual point of view, a much deeper, broader lens than you can get from 10 people in a room with some sandwiches. And that's the promise of it. And it's just like, all of these things are different layers of the onion. They're all different parts of the answer. And before we had like a small bit of the answer, but we thought it was everything because it's all we had. And then you add on more things, and you get more and more and more of the answer. There's no perfect answer, but you get more layers as these things come in. And it's really complex. So you've got analytics, you've got behavioral data, you've got, what was it called? Synthetic data, which is really interesting. Big debate about that. You've got all of these data sources coming in, and AI is going to have to play a really big role in trying to triangulate some of that. And the skills of researchers are going to have to come in and go, we can rely on that to this degree. We can rely on that to this degree. We can rely on this to this degree. All of those things considered, like the role of cross-channel, cross-data synthesis, I think will become incredibly important, and being savvy across all of those platforms. So it might be that AI means that we don't need to be the best thematic analyst in the world, because the AI is going to do a lot of that for us. But what it does do, it means that actually, it's the old standing on the top of the shoulders of giants quote, isn't it? It means that what do you do when everything's just raced up? You search for the next thing you can do, the next way of creating value. And that as like a primal force of development, I think is beautiful. I think that's a really powerful thing. It's not comfortable, but it's really powerful. There's a guy that I row at home, and I use an app, and the guy who runs the app, he's a company called a Sensei, but he's a rowing coach called what's his name? Is it Johan Key? And he talks about being comfortable being uncomfortable, because rowing, if you do it properly, is really uncomfortable, but that's where you grow. So the whole point about where we are right now is it's really uncomfortable for lots of people, but it's also that's where you grow. That's where you're doing original stuff, because you're forming what's out there. You've got an opportunity to create something new. You've got new tools. Super exciting. Obviously,
you work on the agency side.
Yeah.
Do you think there's going to be a shift between? I mean, at the moment, obviously, there are more people. The client's end is growing faster. They're employing more people than agency do. Do you think that shift's going to continue? How's the relationship with the client side going to change, do you think?
It's really interesting. I don't know. And it's kind of cyclical. You have it sort of, the wave goes both ways, isn't it? I think with a lot of the tech tools that we're getting, it's made a lot of the process elements of market research a lot simpler. So you have Otter AI that will do pretty good transcripts of a call pretty quickly. And then they just need refining. So a lot of those elements have stopped being sort of like arcane and esoteric, and have started becoming generic. And as soon as those things become generic, then you don't need to pay an agency a premium to have those. So I think the challenge for the agency, so for me, agency is always about either specialist knowledge that they've developed or breadth of expertise. So a client is within itself. So an agency brings perspective outside of itself, plus specialist knowledge or specialist IP. And when technology is breaking some of those barriers down, then why would you pay an agency a premium to access those capabilities that have become more generic? So that's the challenge, I think, for agencies. I think the sort of cyclical flow of that might be being challenged a little bit by technology, actually making some of those skills more generic, more applicable, more open. So that's going to push it more towards, it will take the capability away from the agencies. But then it's up to the agencies to innovate and find value and find ability to create unique value within that space.
Thank you. That's been really interesting. Genuinely been really interesting.
The other thing I'd say just on that we didn't touch on was just helping people internally be brave enough to try. Because when we first started thinking about AI early in the year, all the presentations I was getting back for the team were, yeah, it's okay, but it's not what we do. And I had to push harder for them to go, no, there is something here. We need to find out what it is. So we need to look at it again. We need to go more in depth and find it. And then when that happened, it's like, oh, actually, it can do all of these things.
And how did you do that? Because that's not an easy thing to train.
No, I just ask nicely. I give my team loads of room, and I just say, look, I believe there's something here. I'm seeing it in other areas. I'm members of other networks as well. So if I see it happening in creative arts, or I see it happening in marketing, I think there's something here, and we need to. I just recognised a hesitancy that I thought was quickly dismissed. It manifested itself as a dismissal, which is, it can't touch what we do. And it's like, if my team has spent 6 months telling me the coding providers we're experimenting with can't quite get what we needed to do, then I believe them. If they spent a few days looking at some tools and gone, no, they can't touch us, I'm less sure. But that's their fear, and that's their uncertainty, and there's also the spin and the hype about it, right? There's all this nonsense about what it's going to do, and Goldman Sachs saying it's going to 300 million jobs or whatever it is going to get lost because of it, and all of that stuff makes people really uncertain. And when you're uncertain, it's really hard to be creative. It's really hard to be innovative from a place of fear. So it's about taking the fear out of the situation and thinking again. I did listening to people talking about improv recently. It's like, yes, and. So we've got this tool, and what are we going to do with it? How are we going to apply it within our current structure or within our current team? How's it going to make us faster? How's it going to make us more efficient? How's it going to make our breadth broader? Let's not assume it's a replacement. Let's assume it's an augmentation. And then trying to get there to think about that and giving them the scope to work it out and play and experiment around the edges of what we're doing. That's the way that I did it.
And do you think that also means that you're looking for slightly different personality types compared to what you might have been looking for before? I mean, people who are perhaps more flexible in their thinking. Perhaps. I've always tried to hire flexible thinkers anyway, because what we do, there aren't like 1,000 great core quant social specialists that I can bring into my business. So it's always about, is there something in the way that you think that I can see flexibility in, that I think that I can then teach the social side to? So if you've got a good, so we traditionally tend to hire qualies over quant, because the heavy lifting for us as a sector is really around telling stories and condensing stories from social into a way that's going to be meaningful for brands. But then it's to teaching them how we do it in the workflow and how we quantify it. That's all been done. So that flexibility of thinking, taking someone who's used to doing other forms of research and then helping them get their head around what we do, that's been a core set right from the beginning. And you've got to have that belief, and that I think the things that are really important is a passion for the source material, and an openness for difference, and an openness to right, I don't know this, but that's fine. I'm going to get into this space, and those are sort of the core qualities I look for. Yeah, so curiosity, always wanting to learn and take on new things, and being uncomfortable. So I had this whole thing again this morning. I was just talking to the team about, we're doing some really, really great, interesting, challenging work, but it's really challenging. And this quote, I'll find the quote. It's a great quote. It's from this guy called Graham Fink, which I'm doing some training with at the moment. Let me just find it. It is worth it. It is, if you know what you're doing, you're not being original. So if you know what you're doing, you're not being original. So when you're doing original work, right, by default, you don't know what you're doing. And that's really uncomfortable. And most people aren't comfortable being uncomfortable. But that's the whole point. When you're being uncomfortable, or not physically, but when you're uncomfortable in the right way at work, to our conversation earlier, but it's going to be in the right way at work. But if it's a challenging brief, that's the bit where you learn.
That's the bit where you're growing. And when the tech is challenging, when the operating environment you're in is challenging, that's the bit that you learn. It's awful. It's really difficult. It's a tough time, but that's the bit that you really sort of like dig deep into what you can do and with what your colleagues can do. And that's where innovation happens a lot, I think. And that's why it's exciting.
You've made some other really good points there. I can see why you won your SMR paper, which
thank you very much.
Was that for the I can't remember how, some people that made pencils.
So Collart is it's a Swedish company, and it's a holding company. So they own a bunch of art brands. So they own Winsor and Newton. So if you go in any art supply shop, you'll see their brands all the place. It's Winsor and Newton. They own Container pencils. They own loads of different brands. There's Snazaroo, Face Pens, Liquitex. They own lots of different brands. France, all over the world. And the work we did for them was very much their research was very kind of traditional. So they did a quant study. The quant study surfaced these three kind of like segments for them, which is students, hobbyists, and professionals. And within that work, there's kind of like this. Okay, well, maybe some of these segments come to life online. So that was the challenge for us. And they hadn't really done any proper social. I don't know. We call what we do enhanced social listening, but it's that kind of sweet spot between social listening over here and market research over there. It's just like great data, great techniques. Let's put them together rather than just use all the tech stuff. And then that was the challenge. It's about saying, hey, well, what are they? So you've got your segmented version of the universe, but how do people segment themselves naturally? And to do that, you start looking at, okay, well, what hashtags are popular, and why are people following hashtags, and what's happening on those hashtags, and how's the language coming together around these sort of clusters of interest? And then doing that enables you to go, well, we found tons. We found over 160, but you have to stop at some point. At different expressions of art. Okay, wow. All within graphic art. There's tons, because life creates, like people create so much. And so much nuance, because you might like manga, but you might like a particular type of manga, or you might like bullet journaling, but you're not very good at calligraphy, so you just do the different type of bullet journaling where it's more life fragments. And where we didn't see it before, life fragments, but the world is really big, right? So your fragment suddenly becomes fairly chunky. So we did this thing. It was all within graphic art. We found 160 different sub tribes, and then we grouped them together into like workable bunches, and we had like 20 of these. We went through them in a workshop, and we were sizing them. So manga was one, and it's this big in France, this big in Germany, this big in UK, this big in US, by a number of activity per month. This many people are posting, this many people are searching for this kind of content. So it gives you a sense of real demand, real interest. You're not sampling, you're looking at the total volume of activity within a social space, in a search space, which is a really powerful metric. And then once you've got that, you can go back to them and then go, okay, we feel we can play really well with this one. And we've got some history here. That one's interesting. So we then zoned it down to 8. And then we went much more qualitative. So then we started doing deep dives into each of those subgroups. So manga was one of them. Landscape art was another. And you start looking at the content from that tribe. And then you get to work out, when you read all that content and synthesize all that content, you go, okay, I get what you're after. I get how you talk to each other. I get why you do it. I get what the challenges are. I get what your kind of emotional and practical needs are. I know how to talk to you now, because I've read hundreds of you. I've seen hundreds of your blogs, posts. I've seen thousands of your comments. I know what this group is. I don't know everything about you, but I don't need to, because when I want to sell you pencils, I just need to be here. And when I'm talking to you about it, that's the thing. And there's one line I have from this project, which is that they sell products. People want to become better artists.
I actually wrote that down and sent it to my marketing director, because I thought that is perfect. That's exactly, yeah.
But that's it. And then it's like, and it's really hard. It's like I struggle with it in terms of marketing my business, because I'm in the business. It's really hard. But that for me was the best bit about that project, is just that one line. Because when you get it, you go, that's what drives people's activity on social media. All the comments are, what pens are you using? How do you do it? And the loads of tutorials, and what you're seeing is engaged demand. I'm looking at your content because I want to become a better artist. And if you get that behind your head, it stops becoming buy these for 10% off, and it starts becoming, if I can enable you to do that, maybe you don't need 10% off.
Yeah, and it's
And
so
that's for
true.
me. And at the moment, that brands aren't doing very well in that space because it's mostly owned by influencers. And you get some brands that are working really well with influencers, but other spaces they're devoid because people haven't really tapped into the fact that that's a really viable go-to-market strategy, is working with decent influencers. I'm not talking Kardashians. I'm talking people who spend their lives doing bullet journaling and then have got all that technique and all that talent to share with other people, have already got a really big engaged audience. That's the thing that research isn't getting at. We do, but traditional research doesn't really have a, where does it start in the world of social influence and social comment? You can't just ask people because it's going to be wrong, right? You have to look. Anyway, I'm preaching now. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I so believe in that because I draw and because I make things out of glass. I just thought that's so true. That's exactly why I look at things on social media.
See, I cook, and I'm a man who's over 50 with back problems. So I use TikTok all the time. So when I'm dropping my kids off at various sporting events, I'll work for a bit and then I'll just TikTok, or I'm waiting to pick them up, and then all my feed is chefs. So I get recipe ideas, inspiration, and I just bookmark it. And then when I get bored, because I've been cooking for my family for 30 years, and I get bored. So it's like that is inspiration. And it's like the ones that I follow are the ones that make me laugh, or ones that make me smile, they've got a personality. And it's the way they're just like micro celebrities, but they don't have to be the next Jamie Oliver. But what they've got is enough of an engaged audience that follow them. And the thing is, every part of life has the same dynamic. It has a latent interest. It has those content creators that are good enough to draw an interest, to gather a crowd, like in every walk of life. And then that's how the sub-communities come together. And then for brands, the opportunity is to find those pockets. And then instead of going scattergun everything with your marketing, you just go, there you are. There's my people. I'm going to talk to them there. And from a research point of view, understanding the people and where they are, that's our challenge.